My name is Lieutenant Colonel Ruth Calder. I am 44 years old. I have been an artillery officer for 20 years, and on a Friday morning in June, the last day of my 3-year command of the 7th Artillery Regiment, I was clearing my desk when I found a letter in the bottom drawer that was not mine. The drawer was deep. The letter was at the back of it, not hidden, simply placed there and not retrieved. An envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges, addressed in handwriting I did not recognize to simply my successor. No rank, no name, no formal military addressing. I turned it over. On the back, in the same handwriting, Major D. Alcott, June, 1984. 40 years ago. I had been the second female commanding officer of the 7th Artillery Regiment. Dorothy Alcott had been the first. She had commanded for 2 years in the early 1980s, and her name appeared in the regimental history in one paragraph that was accurate in its facts and said very little about what her command had actually been. I had read that paragraph before I took the post. I had thought about her. I had not known she had left me something. I sat down at the desk I was about to hand over, and I opened the letter.
The letter. 4 pages, handwritten. The date at the top, June 1984, the last day of Dorothy Alcott's command of the 7th Artillery Regiment, a Friday morning, the same as today. I will not read you every word of it. Some of it is hers, but the shape of it. She had written it as a woman who had spent 2 years commanding a unit that had not been certain it wanted to be commanded by her, and had come to a version of that uncertainty that she understood and had mostly made peace with. She had written, "The first year they will watch you to see if you are an exception. The second year they will begin to understand that you are simply an officer. Both years you will have to be better than you should have to be. This is not fair. It is also not a reason not to do it." She had written about the regiment itself, the particular character of it, the things that had surprised her, the things that had not, the ways in which command had been harder than she had expected, and the ways in which it had been better. She had written, "I hope it has changed by the time you read this. I hope you have had an easier path into this chair than I did. If you have, that is good. If you have not, know that someone sat in this chair before you and found it worth sitting in." She had written, "I did not know your name when I wrote this. I did not know when you would come. I only knew you would come eventually because I could not believe otherwise." 4 pages. 40 years. The object at the center of everything was the letter itself. 4 pages, slightly yellowed, handwriting that was clear and deliberate and that had not aged the way paper ages. The words were as sharp as the day they were written. Dorothy Alcott had written with a fountain pen and had pressed firmly, and the ink had not faded. I sat at the desk for a long time after I finished reading. The handover ceremony was scheduled for 1400. Lieutenant Colonel James Burrows would receive the regimental colors from me at 1400, and the command would pass, and the 3 years would be formally complete. It was 09:20. I had 4 hours and 40 minutes. I spent the first 20 minutes sitting with the letter in my hands. Then I started to find out what had happened to it. The regimental archive. I spent 20 minutes in the archive room that had been there since the regiment was formed. The record of commanding officers, the handover documentation, the 1984 inventory. Alcott to Sims. 1 page. No letter listed. Either Sims had not found it, or he had found it and had not listed it, or he had found it and put it back. I would not know. Sims had died in 2019. The inventory said what it said. The letter had been in the drawer when I arrived 3 years ago. It had been there through every command between Dorothy's and mine. 40 years in the wrong drawer. I want to pause here, because sitting in a regimental archive on the last morning of my command, reading handover inventories, looking for a reference to a letter that had been waiting 40 years, is not how I had expected this morning to go. I had expected to finish clearing my desk, to attend the 1400 handover, to hand over 3 years of work and a regiment I had come to understand properly, and to leave with the particular feeling that only comes at the end of a command, which is not quite pride and not quite loss, and is something in between that has no clean name. I had not expected Dorothy Alcott. If you have ever found something that had been waiting for you for longer than you knew, drop a comment below. And subscribe right now, because what Dorothy had written to a successor she would never meet, and what it meant to finally give it to the people who had been missing it for 40 years, is the part that made this the Friday morning I will remember longest from 3 years of command. Finding Dorothy. She had died in 2009. She had been 71 years old. She had left the Army after her command of the 7th and had had a career in civilian engineering that the Regimental Gazette had noted briefly in her obituary. She had a daughter, Margaret Alcott. I found her through the Regimental Association, the network of former serving members and their families that most regiments maintain. Margaret was listed as a family contact for the Alcott entry. I called her at 10:30. I had 30 minutes before I needed to begin the handover preparations. Margaret Alcott was 63 years old, and she had known her mother had commanded the 7th Artillery Regiment, and she had known very little else about what that command meant to her. Dorothy had not spoken much about it, the way some people do not speak about the things that mattered most, not because they were bad, but because they were too large for ordinary conversation. I told Margaret what I had found. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She wrote a letter." I said, "Yes." On her last day, June 1984, she addressed it to her successor. Margaret said, "And no one passed it on?" I said, "It was in the desk when I arrived. It had been there for 40 years. Margaret was quiet again. Then she said, "She would have wanted it to reach someone." I said, "It did. Today, 40 years late." She said, "Can I have it?" I said, "It belongs to you. I'll copy it first if that's all right, and then I'll send you the original." The 1400 handover. Lieutenant Colonel James Burrows received the regimental colors at 1400. The ceremony was brief and formal and precisely what it should be. Brigadier Alan Morse presided. The regiment stood in correct formation. The colors passed from my hands to Burrows's hands, and the command was complete. I had been the 2nd female commanding officer of the 7th Artillery Regiment. I had found the letter of the 1st. I did not mention Dorothy Alcott in the handover address. The handover address is not the place for that. But I knew what was in my inside pocket as I stood in the parade ground. A copy of 4 pages written in June 1984 in a hand that had pressed firmly and whose ink had not faded. I carried it through the ceremony. What I did after the handover? I went back to the archive. I found the paragraph about Dorothy Alcott in the regimental history. One paragraph, accurate in its facts, saying very little. I submitted a formal request to the regimental historian for the paragraph to be expanded. I provided what I had found: the letter, the inventory, the 40 years, the call with Margaret. The regimental historian, a retired major named Holland Bray, received the request with more interest than I had expected. He said he had not known much about Alcott's command beyond the formal record. He said the letter would be a significant addition to the archive if Margaret was willing to donate a copy. Margaret was willing. The expanded entry for Major Dorothy Alcott now runs to 4 paragraphs. It includes a description of the letter and a short excerpt, 3 sentences that she had written about the regiment itself that Margaret felt could be shared. 4 paragraphs. Not enough, more than one. The copy of the letter. I kept it. I did not keep it because it was mine. It was not. The original went to Margaret. The copy is mine because I was the person it was written for, even if Dorothy had not known my name. I have read it many times since June. not looking for new things, looking at the handwriting, the fountain pen, the firm pressing of ink that had not faded in 40 years. She had written, "I did not know your name when I wrote this. I did not know when you would come. I only knew you would come eventually, because I could not believe otherwise. I had come, 40 years late, but I had come, and I had found it, and it had mattered."
Here is what a letter in a desk drawer taught me. The people who held these posts before us left things behind that we do not always find. Sometimes what they left was formal, the record, the handover inventory, the official history. Sometimes it was a letter in the bottom of the wrong drawer, addressed to a successor whose name they could not know. Dorothy Alcott had commanded this regiment 40 years before I did. She had done it in a time when the path to the chair was harder than mine. She had done it and had found it worth doing, and had written that down and had left it in a desk for whoever came next. I came next. It only took 40 years. The lesson is not about the 40 years. The lesson is about the writing. If you have done something hard and found it worth doing, write it down. Leave it somewhere, for the person who comes after you who will need to know that someone sat in that chair before them. You will not know their name. Write it anyway. Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And subscribe. I am here every week with a new story. She found the letter. She read what was inside. She made sure it reached who it was meant for.